Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to House of Footy. It's your boy Ray, and with me, I got a full house. Welcome, Mac
Good evening.
and Gio.
What is good?
On today's podcast, we're going to be going over the instant reactions to the Premier League clash between Arsenal and Manchester City at the Etihad. Before we get into it, though, don't forget to follow us on our social medias, both on Twitter and Instagram. Our handle is at House of_Footy. Also, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to us. We are on both Spotify and YouTube. And lastly, if you're free to get in touch with us via email, we love hearing from you guys and we want you guys getting involved. Our email is houseoffooty@hotmail.com. Yeah, the really game of the season that it came down to. Top of the table clash. Arsenal at the start of the game were 5 points clear from Manchester City, who had two games in hand. And from the result, if Man City won or tied and won out the remaining of their games, they would be securing the title. A lot of, a couple of changes, Mac, to the starting lineups. Man City resorted back to a back four. Walker, Stones, Diaz, and Akanji making that back four with Akanji and Walker playing as wide backs. And Xhaka was back for Arsenal. Interesting to note, we were kind of predicting in our personal private chat some changes that Pep might bring. And honestly, I think credit to Pep. He definitely had a spot on, and it really showed. How did you see this game, Mac?
Absolutely. In terms of the initial lineups, I thought it was an interesting change looking at kind of bringing in Kyle Walker, because what that did is in the previous games, they've been playing more as four center backs with John Stones. Even though he would start as a center half or a right back, he would shift into the midfield and play alongside Rodri. By lining up Kyle Walker there, they played as a traditional back four with the Kanji in the left back position. And instead of having Rodri by himself as the sole defensive midfielder, it was Gundogan who dropped in deep to help kind of collect the ball. What that did shape-wise on the defensive sense for in rotation for Arsenal, it really prevented Martinelli or Saka getting in positions in behind either of the wing backs, either the wide backs for Manchester City. And Kyle Walker was exceptional in making sure that Martinelli didn't get on the ball. I was keeping track of it as soon as the game started, is that Martinelli didn't actually face him in turn to try to take Kyle Walker one-on-one until the 24th minute of the game. So it was difficult for them to break down the initial press, and Kyle Walker and Akanji on the left-hand side were doing such a great job in managing the positions of how they can make sure that Saka and Martinelli, who are Arsenal's key attacking players, were provided the most goals, very high in assist numbers for both of them individually, where if they can stop them, they can potentially stop Arsenal's kind of attack, what they've initially built up. So overall, spot on for Pep. We've always kind of joked around and critiqued him in the big matches. Maybe he makes a mistake or overthinks it. He thought perfectly through. It worked out well for his team, and even though we're going to talk a lot about how well they were in possession, defensively, the way that they set up with that Kyle Walker change, which one that we kind of thought maybe could happen, but it hasn't been what they've been doing. If it did, it worked out. It could work out well for them, and they played very, very well in that shape. Going back to kind of the old Manchester City in some ways.
Yeah, for sure. Old Manchester City at home, you'd expect them to get off to a hot start, and Gio, that's exactly what they did. Arsenal, over the last couple games, have been feeling a little shaky to start off with. Obviously, the Southampton game comes to mind, but this was definitely not the way they would have wanted to start. Talk to us about that Kevin De Bruyne and Erling Haaland, big man, little man type of partnership up there.
It was perfect. I think off the ball, I know we're all expecting Haaland to score, and we'll get into it and how he did score the last goal. But I think his work off the ball and away from the ball when he's not in possession was fantastic today. I think even him knowing that there's going to be a lot of pressure on him, especially on his back. He played great as a facilitator and moved well off the ball. And I think that's the key, right? He's going to pull defenders away. He's going to open the space up for everyone else. And it opened up the space for the one and only KDB. And KDB, again, had a great offensive game himself. Obviously, not the scorer typically, usually the facilitator himself, but very capable to do so. I thought Haaland off the ball was very key in their success. And just a note on how they kind of just played the wings defended the wings very well as well. They kind of funneled the ball away from Saka's side. They made sure that if it was going to the Martinelli side because they weren't worried as with Martinelli as much, and they'd have to force it through the middle. Made sure that Saka didn't really get too many touches early on, and that's exactly what they did, and it worked very well. So obviously there were weaker points in the Arsenal side, and I guess we can get into it as well. Obviously the sore thumb is Rob Holding. With William Saliba, does this happen? They kind of used him as a dummy the whole game. I think that was sort of offensively the tactic, and in particular what I saw, especially when it came down to it in that third goal via KDB. I think he used them perfectly as a screen, just to block the vision. It was lucky to go through the legs, but I think he did exactly what he wanted, and that's to use them as a screen. Whether the ball was going to go around him or through his legs, whatever the case may be, he used them perfectly as a tool, and because it was pretty central. And as a keeper, if you're face to face with a guy and he's shooting that, 9 times out of 10 you're saving that. But he used them perfectly, and the class showed today. The class really showed.
Class definitely did show, but as you did mention, a couple of, I would say, mistakes, maybe poor decisions from a couple of the Arsenal players really allowed City to get their goals. They did create chances and could have gone more, but definitely goals that came from, especially in the first half, and the third one as well, mistakes from Arsenal. And Mac, maybe you can walk us through it. It's definitely stood out more with Rob Holding on the team, but how are your takes on some of these mistakes leading to goals?
It really came up because Arsenal going into the game, and something that we had talked about and I mentioned in our previous podcast, is that in terms of how they're going to play style, they're not going to really make any changes. So Pep really knew in terms of, okay, what type of actions when Arsenal are going to press and where do they press? Generally speaking, what that means in attack is that you see Odegaard generally press one of the two center halves, which that means in a 3-man midfield, you're losing a man there. So that leaves Xhaka and Partey with a 3-on-2 against Gundogan, Rodri, as well as KDB. Generally speaking, especially in a press, what that means is that two of the two midfielders are going to be moving up, trying to cover the Gundogan and Rodri piece. So that leaves a free man in KDB roving in behind that 2-man midfield between Xhaka and Partey, especially on Partey. So if they're able to launch a ball up and win their one-on-one duels, they're going to be in the position to quickly get out as long as they're able to get a clean first pass off the initial long ball, which is what happened in the first phase of play for the very first goal for Manchester City. The key part is because what, in addition in terms of Rob Holding playing, because what generally could have happened in those situations is that because he's not as confident in his pace, he plays a lot deeper. If you see and I think that I shared this video, I think with the both of you prior, is that if you look at their average kind of line in terms of how high they play between Saliba and Rob Holding, there's meters of difference between the two because of him not trusting that. So what that allows is a little bit more time, and the space between either the center halves and any of the defensive midfielders is going to give even someone that's not as clean of a touch traditionally as Haaland he may be, it's going to give him enough space to be able to kind of bring it down, have the close control, as well as when those long balls do come up, he's not in as aggressive a position to be able to compete one-on-one. So it seemed like that was a game plan for Pep going in, is that in transition, if we can isolate either center halves along with Erling Haaland, and KDB's going into being that free space, we're going to be able to get on attack. And it happened time and time again, where you saw 2-on-2s, 3-on-3s in transition, and it was quite fortunate for Arsenal, especially in the first half, not to concede more. So overall, that kind of, as Gio mentioned, the sore thumb in terms of the Arsenal lineup did stick out, because if you have someone different, if you have Saliba in there and how he's traditionally played, he's going to be able to he wants to press higher up the pitch. Maybe Arsenal will be able to kind of nick those passes, and then they can instead get in transition and kind of counter press against the City team versus having to play much more defensive, much more reactive. And that's how it really played out in the first half and led to a lot of chances, really. And like I said, Arsenal were very fortunate not to be 3 or 4 down in the first half, in all actuality, in my opinion.
That being said, though, Arsenal were only down 1-0 before added time in the first half, and I think Arteta would have been very, very happy if they went into the halftime 1-0 down. Unfortunately, though, for Arsenal, Gio Stones gets on the end of a header, a cross from a free kick. I think it was Kevin De Bruyne who puts it in. It was called offside on the pitch, but was overturned by VAR. was it a right call? There was a little bit of controversy about whether he was offside, onside. What were your thoughts about that, and how big did that shift sort of the momentum for City?
Oh, it was huge. But I guess that's the reason VAR is kind of implemented as well. Those fine margins that the naked eye can't see. So if we're going off technicality, yeah, that is the right call. That technically is onside based on VAR, but we've seen VAR mistakes. But again, it definitely changed. It shifted the momentum further in the City favor because it was 3 games in a row where they have to dig themselves out of a hole, and now you have to dig yourselves out of a hole against Man City, a Pep Guardiola Man City who has been in a phenomenal run of form. I think that's very defeating for any squad, and then for them to play so well, kind of keep you deep into your own corners, forcing you to play bad passes. It was tough. So, especially with that crowd, it was tough. I think obviously they were trying, but again, just the way they were ball denying Saka, it was really hard for Arsenal to really get anything going.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that as well. I think, Mac, you're dying to get into sort of the defensive shape that Man City had to sort of negate some of the attacks that Arsenal had. Just want to bring up, though, the fine margins of this, myself being a Liverpool fan, of course, reminds me of when John Stones made that clearance against Liverpool in the 2018-2019 clearance season, 11 millimeters from the ball going and being considered in, and those fine margins, again, in this game, and John Stones, the player, to get that goal for City, who, I think really changed the momentum of the game, added onto the momentum for City in the game, and made it easier for Pep to sort of approach the second half with a 2-goal lead. But Mac, nothing to take away from sort of the way Man City shaped their defense. I think they did a great job sort of having a mid-block, I would say, not necessarily pressing because they were obviously in the lead, but really having Gundogan and Rodri forcing the play down the middle, of course, and then just having those guys intercept and get on the end of really sometimes flimsy, maybe not really firm passes from Arsenal. What are your takes on that?
Absolutely, because this is a different kind of, I guess, tool in the tool belt that this Manchester City team has now that they didn't have before, where they have more variance in terms of different ways they can be successful. I think they still have the same type of philosophy overall. Here are the principles that we're going to focus on, but there's a couple different ways they can potentially approach it. They're going to definitely try to deny space. They're going to apply pressure when they can in the correct kind of motions, but they have the ability is like, hey, if we need to play kind of, in some ways, it was a 4-4-1-1 in a lot of aspects, where both Bernardo Silva and Jack Grealish on the wing I would argue, provided much more of the work defensively than even offensively, and that's probably where they showed out a little bit more in terms of retaining possession, trying to build back up, and denying one-on-one situations. Because anytime you see a couple seconds of Martinelli or Saka on the ball, you immediately saw one of those two guys coming back to be able to do a 2-on-1 and try to get the possession back circulated towards the middle, where Manchester City were outnumbering Arsenal in the midfield. So overall, you can definitely understand why because this kind of, not to call him a tool, but in some ways, this battering ram that you have of Erling Haaland to look, there's a different approach play that we can have against a team that, hey, we know that they want to be comfortable in possession. If we try to high press them, they can potentially be in a situation where we're having high scoring back and forth games. We don't want that. We don't need that. We're in a position right now where we'll take a win. Great. Even if we have a tie, it's not the worst case scenario. If we could be in a position where we can nick goals off on the counter or even get a lead early on, they're in a position to sit comfortably for the rest of the game. So this is just another evolution of the versatility that this City team has that they historically haven't. So in terms of what you said in terms of the mid-block, applying pressure in certain situations, because it's very rare that a Manchester City team is outpossessed, which is what they were at home even, right? So it's definitely unusual in terms of seeing kind of the stats line up in that direction, but you can understand it given the situation, given the team that they have, and still sticking to their principles of how they want to play when they do get the ball.
Yeah, and I know, Mac, you're going to hate me referencing this, but it feels like even though City conceded a lot of possession, they were in dominant they were in domination of the game. They set traps, forced turnovers from the Arsenal team, very similar to maybe you might disagree, Mac, a Real Madrid team who will allow you to keep the ball but choose their times to really go forward and attack the weaknesses from the other team. And Gio, after the third goal goes in, pretty much the tie is settled. I think I was interested to see if Arteta would change things in the second half. He did bring on Trossard and Jorginho for Martinelli and Xhaka. I don't think they were able to, and it's unfair for them to be expected to change much of the game. But on the City side, Gundogan is able to come off. He played an exceptional game. And who do you bring on? The hat-trick hero from the weekend to inflict more damage to this Arsenal team. So, yeah, talk to me, Gio, about sort of the depth that the City team have. And even though, the game's 90 minutes, I think by that time the third goal goes in, Arsenal deflated. It was just one way, one team that was going to win it at all time. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, they were on cruise control. It wasn't until late in the game, even when Arsenal, had their chances, particularly when they scored their goal, is when they kind of let up a little because they knew they had the game in control. Even if they scored one goal, it wasn't really detrimental to them. The way they're able to keep the ball, and again, once they lose the ball and trap the player that took the ball from them, and again win the ball right back. Their system was near flawless this game. So, I mean, it worked very well. And then, again, like it wasn't until the 85th minute where we saw more of the ball, like 75th to like 85th minute where we saw the ball on that Saka side, but obviously too little, too late. And of course they got one back, but really City were simply unfazed. At that point, they were, standing around more so as they wanted the game to end more than anything. So yeah, it was near flawless in terms of tactics.
That's exactly right. I think we're just gonna take a break here, but it's important to note that Haaland got his 33rd goal of the season right at the end. I think a poor clearance from Arsenal, right back down the middle. Phil Foden brings it down nicely and feeds Haaland with his hair flowing. That's just the way City are playing. Everything's flowing, and his hair is the perfect metaphor to how it's going for them. So we're going to take a quick break here, boys, and then we'll be back just to see what this means in terms of the result for the title challenge. So stay with us. Welcome back to Hustle Footy, guys. We're just going to continue our review of the Manchester City 4-1 win over Arsenal. I'm not sure if I mentioned that in the first part, but it is quite important to note Man City were the winners. And so that being said, we got to talk about the main man of the match, Kevin De Bruyne. Gio, just a amazing performance, start to finish until he was taken off. Scorer of 2 goals and provider of 1. How has his sort of influence on this team brought them to where they are now? Really the standout guy and I think the go-to guy for City, even though he's not the one scoring like Haaland, he's still a very integral part of this team. What were your thoughts?
I mean, look, everything he does off the ball is equally as important as Haaland putting the ball into the back of the net. Without him doing that, without him doing the grunt work in the middle, winning the ball, making the tough passes, Haaland doesn't prosper. So I think as much as Haaland is breaking these goal records, I think KDB definitely deserves a huge chunk of that credit. I think Haaland needs to take him out for a nice dinner after the season for sure. But no, it just goes to show how versatile he is as a player. Of course, we know him as set piece, sending balls into the box, making threading the needle as they say, pinpoint passes. But when he's called upon and he has those opportunities to score, he's equally as capable as the next guy to score on the City team. And that's the thing with the City team, because of the depth, it's a next man up mentality, and anybody is able to score. Any and everybody. Let me phrase it like this. Every single player that comes onto that pitch is capable of putting a ball in the back of the net. And it just goes to show, whether it's John Stones, whether it's KDB, whether it's Rodri, Ruben Diaz, these guys are all threats in their own respective ways. So when a team has to deal with that, not only just the starting 11, and their five subs, it's quite frustrating. So yeah, I think KDB definitely deserves the man of the match, and definitely deserves very high praise from Pep and the whole City club.
Yeah, Mac, of course, stand out for this game, and I think it's fair to say throughout his entire career. But will his achievements go a little bit sort of undervalued because of how good City have been? I feel like we all know he's amazing, probably one of the best midfielders in the world on his day, and has been for a few years now. Is it fair to say that he's still undervalued as one of the best Premier League midfielders of all time?
I would say so. The reason being is because, for one, when you kind of look at his career statistics and what generally people look at midfield, especially back in like the early 2000s or even last decade, it was, okay, how many goals are we really getting, right? That's like the first thing that they look at. If you look at the Lampards, he was in the conversation as one of the best midfielders of all time just because of the goals he scored. But if we talk about his individual quality on the ball, I think we'll all agree he's not in that class. Whereas KDB has all that ability, but doesn't kind of bang in the same amount of goals, but does so much off the ball, be able to be versatile in different positions. In the creative sense, he's going to rack up the assists like nobody else. So he's definitely in the conversation, in my opinion, and maybe has kind of the first seat at the table in that conversation for best midfielder in Premier League history, in my opinion. And this next phase, to use, I guess, a basketball comparison, and I think you both might enjoy this. This is very similar, in my opinion, is that LeBron won his first 2 titles with Miami. He's like, you know what? That team's done. Let me go get Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love, and let's meet him in Cleveland. And the comparison is, that's how he brought Holland. Because if you talk to Holland about why he wanted to be able to go to City, yes, Pep, yes, the culture, but it was more, I'm going to score a feast amount of goals from the opportunities created. And in terms of those highlights, if you see Raheem Sterling missing tap-ins, where most of the crosses are coming from? Where are the most balls being played from? Kevin De Bruyne. So he was in a position like, hey, we're going to bring him into, we're going to take this to another level, and he's going to continue to be able to dominate and rack up an insane amount of numbers just by playing simple football off of him. So in a lot of ways, you can definitely see the evolution of his game growing. And I think in some ways, his career is going to ring hollow until the Champions League success does end up happening, because I think that will kind of then further elevate him into a different tier of conversations where, okay, in the Premier League, he's done it, he's done the business, but he's still missing that Champions League piece. Can he be able to latch onto that? Can he bring that to the table? Because then I think the surrounding conversation around him is definitely going to kind of be taken to a different level, in my opinion.
That being said, now that we are on Manchester City, we know it's now in their hands. Of course, they are still second in Premier League, but they have that win over Arsenal now, 2 points behind with 2 games in hand. Where does Man City go from here? Mac, treble is still on, very much so, and honestly, the way they're playing against Madrid, I do think they're heavy favorites with the way sort of they're able to manage games and know that in the back pocket they have a tie at the Etihad, which they've been very strong in. I actually think the only way they lose a treble here might be a one-off game against Man United in the FA Cup if Pep is maybe resting players. But yeah, talk to me about Man City, Mac.
I think that's a spot on assessment, because over 2 legs, and they have a home game which they are dominant in. I think I've talked about in a previous podcast is that going into knockout rounds in the Champions League, away matches they've only drawn, they haven't won one yet, but they just destroy teams at home that it doesn't even matter, right? And they feel very confident in that. So unless Real Madrid, I think, pick up maybe a 2 or 3 goal lead in the first leg, I think we can close doors on that second leg, in my opinion, because of how good Man City have been at home. It would have to take kind of a performance that they haven't done thus far this year, really, for them to kind of have that overturned. It's obviously, of course, potentially capable of happening, but I feel like it's highly unlikely. And going into that Champions League final, potentially, if they were to be able to go there might be so much emotion and anxiety you could see potentially have that slip, even in that game. But I think if we argue what is the most secure out of the 3 titles that they're still chasing, it would be the Premier League. Their fixture fixture list is quite soft. It's baby cakes for them. It should be easy. It should be 3 points on the board week in, week out, with being able to do heavy rotations. Because I think the only tough team that they still have to play, if I remember correctly, is Brighton. And that is away, and he's yet to be kind of, I don't think that they've even picked the individual day of when that game's going to be made up. So they should feel very confident, because even if they end up dropping some points, they still have enough of a lead over Arsenal. If they win out, they should be fine. The only thing, aside from, I guess, those slips up potentially in a finals matchup, is injuries, right? Where injuries could stack up theoretically against them. But given how deep they are as a team and how flexible their lineups can be, unless it is to a big gun, kind of maybe of an Ederson or a Holland or a KDB for an extended time period, there's very few reasons why theoretically they shouldn't win all three and potentially be in a position to go down as maybe the best English domestic team of all time, in my opinion. Yes,
those are great shouts. And just listening back to an interview with Pep after the game, Gio, saying how, they were losing games early in the season, October, November, and Arsenal were playing great. I think they had 50 points at the half-point mark of the season. But he said to his team, if we can be in the conversation at the start of the year, keep hitting form, then we're always going to be in it. And that's championship mentality, Joe, from City. How has sort of this time and time again, Pep has been able to elevate his team? How impressed are you with that?
Extremely impressed. Of course, I think we all have our favorite teams, but I think we are bigger football fans, and this is peak football, boys. And it just really goes to show a class manager to let the boys know that, hey guys, this is a marathon. We lose a couple of games early on, so what? Let them think lower of us. We will come out and smash teams, and they just needed to get there. They just needed to be a little bit more cohesive. Obviously, with the addition of Holland and everything like that. Holland also needed to buy into the system a little more as well, and we see him flourishing now. More than ever. So yeah, all credits to Pep. We'll see what he wants to do after the potential Champions League title. That it is highly in their favor at this point. If he does win, does he stay at City or does he move on to different challenges? Because it's hard for me to it'd be hard for anyone to leave a squad this good. But again, I guess it will go to show, maybe it's not Pep and it's just the squad. But again, that will only be a what if.
Yeah, for sure. And lastly, to wrap up the podcast, Gio, we have to answer the question. There's a lot of talk of, obviously, Arsenal were in such a lead, so many points with so many games to go. But now it's all in City's hands. Still in first place, Arsenal. But at this point, do you consider that Arsenal have bottled it? What are your thoughts?
My personal opinion, I don't know why I have this smile on my face. I don't care who wins at this point. Yeah, I think so. I think it's City's title to lose at this point. Again, although they're not in first and not yet in first, with the games in hand, I think it just highly favors them. Again, the depth says it all. I think in and around the season, of course, was Jorginho enough? Was Jorginho the right signing? Mac's obviously going to say no, and time did tell that it wasn't enough. So who does Arsenal have to blame if they don't end up winning the title? Is it a board issue? We have such a good chance here to win the title and get a lot more funding as well from winning the title. Is it a risk we're willing to take? It wasn't a risk they were willing to take at the time, but only time will tell if it comes back around and bites them in the ass. But again, I think they did bottle it. City, with games in hand, it's tough to bet against City at this point.
Exactly. Echo that thought. I'm a little torn in between sort of how I want to answer this, but I think I'm going to go with the answer yes, Arsenal have bottled it. And what I mean is the position that they had in the games where they dropped points. They were favorites, as we all know, going into the run-in that they had. with those results, they did, in essence, bottle it. But I don't think Arsenal as a whole, and looking back at where they sort of wanted to be start of the season, can't be disappointed in themselves. It obviously will be a disappointment. I think with how we think the season will play out, not being able to secure the title, but based on the position that they were in, and sort of the run-in that they had, losing those games, the vital point, that is to me the definition of bottling it. But Mac, lastly, and certainly not least, your thoughts?
So I mostly agree with what you're saying, Ray. I'm going to go with no. I don't think they have bottled it. The reason being is that they should be disappointed. I think that's the key part. Just like last year, there's a lot of talk of them bottling top four. It's about the progression. If you kind of take a step back and look at the projection of the club, how they've done year over year. Last year, they were never going to be, going into the season, a lot of people didn't have in the conversation to be close to making top four. They just missed out by a hair. Going into this season, I want to ask you guys a quick question. Aside from Leicester City, which I think we all famously know in terms of winning the title going into the season, there were 5,000 to 1 odds. Arsenal were 40 to 1 going into this season odds for winning the Premier League title. Take a guess what the after that, let's say, aside from Arsenal potentially, because going on, they may not win the Premier League, and we know that Leicester did. So second place in terms of the history of the Premier League. What is the second, let's say, worst odds in terms of a team going into a season ending up winning the Premier League title? Throw out a random number, I guess. I don't want to use that comparison. Worst of all time is 5,000 to 1. Arsenal would technically, if they went on to win this season, would have been 40 to 1 odds, would have been second place in terms of the lowest ranked odds to win the title. So who else comes to mind? Do you what odds do you think theoretically would have given you potentially for another team to have won it? If you don't have one, I have the answer right away in terms of what would you think are some fair odds in terms of someone winning?
And the worst one was Leicester City.
The worst one's Leicester City. If Arsenal had won or would go on to win the Premier League, 41 to 1 odds would have been second place. So everyone else had better odds. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So what do you think at the third place, if it would have happened, or technically as of right now, second place is in terms of the worst odds going into the season that ended up winning the Premier League title? I know you both don't do gambling a lot, so you're not familiar with how the odds work. Okay, well, I'll just give you the answer.
Not sure, but yeah.
So it's actually in the 06-07 season for Manchester United, and the odds were 13 to 2. So you're talking about what the odds-on favorites of winning the Premier League title going into a season. You generally have to be in the first, second, or potentially even third overall odds to have a shot or be within a shout. Arsenal 41 to be in a conversation. I think if you just look at progression of the club and the question being, have they bottled it? No, because everyone was projecting going in. None of us had them in our top two. It's not the nature of, I guess, how you should look at a club holistically in terms of progression year over year. They should be happy where they are. To be disappointed that of course, they couldn't maintain that gap that they did have. But overall, is this progress? Absolutely.
Definitely progress, and we'll definitely look back. Still games to go. Potentially Arsenal could still win it. So we'll definitely give you a comprehensive overview when it's all settled. But definitely more podcasts from us to come, guys. Still a lot to play from the Premier League, and especially time of recording tomorrow will be Thursday, a big one for the top four. So on that note, guys, this concludes our podcast for today. If you like what you heard, please like and subscribe to us on our social medias. That's at house_of_footy. If you have any comments, suggestions, or general banter, get in touch with us via email, houseoffooty@hotmail.com. The next time you hear from us will be tomorrow when we review the rest of the midweek action and tee up this weekend around the Premier League. So thank you, Mac, for joining us.
Saliba, I miss you.
Thank you, Gio.
Holland, too good, bad.
See you guys soon.